Hello, friends. This is Molly, and I'm here today to talk with you about rulerships, ruling planets, how to find the ruler of a planet, how to find the ruler of a house. You can think about the ruler of a sign as the landlord of that sign, the sign. The landlord has a say in what's going on in that sign, even if the landlord is not in that sign. So we can look to the signs that a planet is in to get a little more information, to get a little more flavor about that planet. For example, the first example I have up is Joe Biden here. I think we all know who Joe Biden is. He's this time he's about a week away from being elected president of the United States, we think. And so let's look at his houses and kind of see what's going on. All right. It's a really interesting chart because there's a lot of stuff in the 12th house. But let's look at the first house of identity. The first house of identity is here. This is the cusp of the first house. All right. First house. The cusp of the first house, also called the ascendant in this particular house system. The cusp of the first house is in the sign Sagittarius. And the ruling planet of Sagittarius is Jupiter. All right, that's the ruling planet of the sign on the cusp of the first house. To shorten that, we can say the first house ruler is Jupiter. All right, so what's the flavor of Joe Biden's first house? What flavor of Sagittarius is he? Well, he's a Jupiter in Cancer flavor Sagittarius. So his identity and how he relates and reaches out to people, how he does his Sagittarius is in a very Cancerian way. Family oriented, emotional, empathic. He's very much known right now for the degree to which he can display empathy and really reach out to a wide number of people, and that is very Jupiter in Cancer. So Jupiter is the landlord of the first house, even though Jupiter is not in the first house, and that is because Jupiter rules the sign Sagittarius, and Sag is on the first house cusp. That's how we determine the ruler of a house. So let's do another one. Let's do the house of career. All right. The career house is the 10th house. All right. The cusp of the 10th house is also called the midheaven. The sign on the midheaven is Virgo. The planet that is the landlord of Virgo is Mercury. And Mercury's here in the 12th house. All right. Yeah, so we can see that there's a lot going on under the surface, and that if he is elected president, he'll probably be fairly secretive. Mercury in Scorpio is very secretive about the details about the Virgo. He'll be secretive about what he's doing, about his public life in a way. So that's very interesting. It always surprised me that Joe Biden has so much happening in the 12th house. And that to me says that there will be some behind the scenes stuff going on in his presidency that we might never know. And that he knows how to keep a secret. So it kind of cuts both ways. In one sense, he's secretive. In another sense, yay, he can keep a secret. He's not going to be giving up secret intelligence and stuff like that. Now, let's talk about rulers of a planet. All right. So the ruler of the 5th house. Let's do the 5th house. The 5th house has Aries on the cusp. All right. So that makes the 5th house ruler the house of creativity and children. The 5th house ruler is the ruling planet of Aries, the planet that rules Aries, which is Mars. So we would say Mars is the 5th house ruler, and Mars carries that 5th house energy, the energy of leadership, over here to the 11th house of communities and friends and groups and associations. All right, but there's a planet here too, and it's in a different sign. So the ruler of the moon the moon has a different landlord. The moon's landlord, because the moon is in Taurus, the moon's ruler is the planet Venus. All right. So the emotional message, what brand of Taurus moon is Joe Biden? Okay, we know that Joe Biden is, we know because of his Taurus moon that he's steady, can be stubborn, he's consistent in his emotional expression, down to earth, pretty grounded in that sense. But what brand of Taurus is he? Well, he's a Scorpio brand. So that makes it a little more complicated, right? So still waters, the fixed nature of the Taurus moon is still waters. All right, still waters run deep because the moon's ruler is in Scorpio. So it's a quieter, more internal, more inward, perhaps spiritual, more behind the scenes expression of his emotional self. All right, so the moon's in the 5th house, and that means that he intuitively knows how to be a leader, but the ruler of the moon is in the 12th, and that means there are parts of him that he keeps to himself, that he plays close to the vest. Let's do one more planet. We can stick with the theme that we were working on before, and let's look at the 8th house. What's the landlord of the 8th house? With the 8th house cusp in Cancer, the landlord of the 8th house is going to be the moon. All right. So the ruler of the 8th house is the moon, and the moon has an influence in all of the affairs of the 8th house. It means that whenever the moon gets activated in Joe Biden's chart, the 8th house gets activated too. All right. So the moon is the landlord of the 8th house and also the landlord of Jupiter. Jupiter also answers to the moon and is influenced by the moon. The moon appears in Joe Biden's house of children, all right? And the moon rules over Jupiter in the 8th house. The 8th house is about trauma, death, rebirth, and he did lose his first wife and I believe it was his daughter in a car accident, in a traumatic 8th house, 8th rules traumas, traumatic accident, and they died. There's another 8th house idea. And that can be the source of the empathy that he shows so much, that is so much a part of his identity, which Jupiter has influence over that identity, because Jupiter is the landlord of the house of identity. Interesting, huh? So try it yourself. See if you can practice finding the rulers and understanding how they exert an influence over the houses and signs that they are the landlord of.